All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our July 5th live discussion. Glad to see a few people in the room. um, so tonight's conversation is about prevention. One of the things that I think is kind of important when we're working as health coaches or in the health field in general is how important it can be to prevent morbidity and mortality from happening. So the discussion prompt talks about the fact that somewhere between 75 and 85% of premature morbidity and mortality are preventable. And yet we don't really spend much of our healthcare dollars on prevention. Sometimes we even refer to it as medical care instead of healthcare. If you think about what kinds of preventative things are covered under our typical health insurance plans, though we're getting better at that. The Affordable Care Act really underlined the importance of prevention in healthcare. So we're getting there. I once asked the Surgeon General, former Surgeon General, why they never changed the acronym for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. They added the "and" prevention in 1992, but they left the acronym as CDC, which I always felt didn't help our case. In any case, we have this conversation ongoing in the field about how do we get people to do the things we need them to do such that they can stay healthier. I am pretty open about my lack of love with sunscreen. Normally in the summer, I have at least one or two of these videos where I'm really crispy because I was at the pool and refused to put sunscreen on. Hasn't been that kind of summer this summer. My skin probably thanks me for it. But what's the impetus or what is the impediment, pardon me, to why I just refuse to do that? I know it's not healthy or good for me. I know what the consequences are. I know how I get there. And I, generally do it every single year. And we could look at a lot of our different health-related issues that way. Most of us know generally what a healthier diet is. Most of us generally understand that we have to be physically active. We understand generally that sleep is important. We understand that there are a variety of safety implements, seatbelts, bicycle helmets, condoms, immunizations, sunscreen, bug spray, whatever it is that helps us prevent morbidity and mortality. So as a health coach, then what we have to do is help a client unlock that little magical piece, that intention, that cue to action, whatever it is that's preventing them from moving forward and actually participating in the behavior. And here's where I think health belief model can be kind of helpful. If you think about the barriers versus the benefits, right? Keeping in mind that this is a client-centered approach. We're the coach, right? So we need the person to do most of the work. So what do they see as the benefits or as the barriers to doing something? Have you ever heard yourself? I've heard myself say, oh, I would just give anything to, and then fill it in, And it's like, well, would you give anything or would you just give the thing? Right? Like, could you just eat healthy and exercise? Right? Maybe just do that. Maybe you don't have to give everything. Maybe you just have to do those couple of things, right? But we also don't want to minimize the barriers, right? Like, why don't we just do the things? And then there's the list of reasons, right? I'm tired. I just don't want to. I just can't make it fit. It's not, right? Those excuses, we might call them, or legitimately the barriers, the things that are preventing us from doing whatever it is that we want to be doing or not be doing. So unpacking that for the individual isn't going to be helpful, but helping the individual unpack it for themselves is generally what's going to be more helpful. If they can identify the barriers and they can identify the benefits, because that's what they're going to have to focus on when they're having those relapse moments, right? Is why am I doing this again? Or what's the good part about me doing this again? And that way they can help themselves do the work. The idea that prevention takes all the fun out of everything, I don't want to just totally say that that's not true. There were sexual health educators of sorts who would say, wearing a condom doesn't make any sex any different? It's like, yeah, it does, right? Getting those COVID vaccines, I got 5 of them. They hurt. They all made me sick, right? But so those were barriers that we have to think about. How do we overcome those? How do we do the thing anyways, the thing we don't want to do anyways? And that again has to come from that individual person. What do they see as the thing that might help them um, get it done, right? And so sometimes it's scheduling, sometimes it's goal setting, sometimes it's just someone to hold us accountable, right? If we have a regular appointment with someone or we're talking about something with someone, I never skipped a yoga class when I had a yoga studio. I skip all the time when I'm like, oh, I should do some yoga right now. I could put my mat down and do it. And it's like, I don't hold myself to the same expectation. I mean, if we're being honest, we could say we don't respect ourselves as much as we respect those other people. We hold our commitments with those other people. Why aren't we holding our commitments with ourselves? And sometimes the question, and this was one of the questions on the exam that was confusing because there were lots of right answers and Canvas was only giving you one right answer choice, but I'm fixing them. Which is that the idea of a person being able to know what the thing is, but maybe not be able to figure out how to get themselves to do it, right? Other kinds of clients can get themselves to do it. They just don't know what the thing is, right? So they just need a good smoking cessation plan and then they'll enact it. They just need some help with, how to organize a physical fitness routine, right? And then they will actually hold themselves to it. So every person that we're working with is going to be just a little bit different. So helping unpack what the pieces are in that health behavior, if you think about health belief model, right? What are our beliefs? What are our benefits of our beliefs, of our barriers to enacting the behaviors? How susceptible do we think we are to the negative consequence, right? As a population, we've moved from sanitation issues to infectious disease issues to now predominantly chronic disease issues being our main morbidity and mortality. Whatever, the things that kill us and make us sick, right? And we did that with developments in science, developments in behavior change, so on and so forth. So it's such now that in a society like ours, where we mostly have an immense amount of stability and privilege, access to things like potable water, mostly breathable air, right? Most of Americans have access to food. Not all, but relative to other nations, we're pretty privileged. As such, our causes of death are chronic, right? Which are essentially our consequences of our own choices. I used to like to use the Ghostbusters reference, the choose your destructor, right? Choose that thing. What is that thing that's going to be what kills us, essentially, right? And then once we know what those things are, say we have predispositions in our family or I guess that would be it, genetic markers, things of that nature, then we can aim to prevent those things. When we don't know what those things are, general prevention tips, right, usually work. But there again, it's enacting the prevention tip. And so, thinking about those in different ways. My favorite theory is theory of reasoned action, planned behavior. So that's like that rationale, right? Or the intention, the planning behind it. People have to have a high level of perceived behavioral control. If I'm a 5th grader and I come home and tell my caretakers that I need a healthy dinner, and that this isn't it, this thing that you've prepared isn't it, I don't really always have that agency to prescribe or to tell my family essentially what to serve me for dinner, right? Or what my food choices are. I'm a little powerless in that situation. So understanding then what parts of this can we actually control? I can't control my genetics. Most of us have a body type and shape that's at least partially inherited. Our number of fat cells is genetically prescribed. You can increase or decrease the sizes of them, but some of us have different battles to fight when it comes to fitness than others of us do. So there's only so much of that that's within our control. And so trying to figure out which elements of those pieces that we might enact into a prevention plan. And if a person has goals, and perhaps you've heard this before, as health coaches, we're often working with people to develop what we would call SMART goals, right? That are specific. That's the S. So are we thinking about what that goal is specifically? So not that I want to be in better shape, but maybe I want to run a faster mile, or maybe I want to be stronger. Maybe I want to reduce my body fat, whatever it is, right? Maybe I want to sleep at least 6 hours. Maybe I want to meditate or pray at least 5 times a week. Maybe I want to, fill it in, whatever it is specific. You'll notice the M slipped in there, measurable, right? Is it measurable? So more is kind of easy, but categorically more, right? I need to move more. And it's like, oh, wait, I just moved my arm. Is that more, right? I want to, instead of hanging out with my social support network once a week, I'm going to increase that to 3 times a week, right? So there's an increase, there's a measurement we can say and look to see whether or not we actually did that. Can't figure out where to look, sorry. SMA, achievable. Is it something that we actually can achieve, right? Is it appropriate is another thing that sometimes people make the A stand for. So during spring semester, sometimes a student will say, well, I want to lose 30 pounds by spring break. And it's like, well, spring break is next week. So that's not really achievable, right? Or appropriate, perhaps. So achievable, realistic is another way we put the R in there, and then time oriented. So it's just actually about how we write out that goal, right? So is it specific enough? Is it measurable enough? Is it achievable and realistic? And is there a time orientation? So, I want to go 5 times instead of 3, or in the next 10 weeks, I want to achieve this ultimate outcome, however it is. And oftentimes we'll work on a big goal and then we'll chunk it out into smaller goals so that we have more short-term and more intermediate term, and then more long-term goals to help the person move in that direction. So sometimes the prevention message, we kind of, we think there's an ending point to it. We learned an important lesson in my family this last year. We have an aunt who's in her 60s who actually got diagnosed with AIDS in November and almost died, was that sick from it. And it turns out one of those people that I learned about in the 80s when I first started learning about sexual health, and in the 90s then when I was a sexual health educator, when HIV and AIDS were something that we were all learning about and very concerned about. And it was a very different time back then. But we would talk about these people that would have HIV for 10 years and not know it. And that used to be because the testing was difficult, right? And trying to find the virus live made it very difficult, at first impossible, and then just extremely difficult and complicated to test for. And people would say, well, can lay, underneath your system, right? Or be undetectable, but you actually have it. And so there was all kinds of things that we didn't understand about the virus at first. But my aunt actually was someone that had HIV for probably 10 years. When she finally got to her HIV doctor and got tested, her T cell count was 7. Healthy T cell count is usually 1,500, and an AIDS diagnosis usually comes when that T cell count drops below 200. So she was really sick. She had cytomegalovirus in her eyes, which is an opportunistic infection, and had been very sick for a considerable amount of time because they were testing her for everything except HIV, right? And so most of my students think, that I, as a sexual health educator, want everybody to either be abstinent, right? Not a bad choice, or to protect everything from everything. So make sure we're getting all the consent stuff done. So we're protecting from sexual violence and coercion and rape and sexual assault, and protect from pregnancy if we're doing those kinds of things. Sexual activities that could lead to pregnancy, prevent sexually transmitted infections if we're exchanging bodily fluids or touching our bodies in intimate ways. So yeah, to all of those things, right? Yes, maybe stay abstinent if that's a good choice for you. Yes, maybe use contraceptives if pregnancy is a potential thing, outcome that you want to avoid. Perhaps use other prophylactics to prevent from other STIs. But guess what else is prevention? Getting tested for STIs, right? Now I'm going to lecture you for a minute. More than half of people who are walking around with an STI don't know they have it because they didn't think to get tested. They didn't think they felt like they had one, or they should have one, or that they engaged in the kinds of activities with the kinds of people from which you get those sorts of things, right? And then among your population, the 18 to 25-year-olds, about half of you all who have an STI admit that you would lie to a person about having it. Basically, you would deny having it if asked. So when you start doing that math, if half of us with an STI don't know we have it, and half of us who know we have it are going to lie about it, then only a quarter of the people we might be choosing as sexual partners are telling us what is actually the truth, either because they don't know or they are obscuring the truth from us about their status, right? And so that's complicated. So how do we protect ourselves? Is then to probably continue to protect ourselves until we're confident that the person that we're making these decisions with is someone who's going to tell us the truth about these kinds of things. And there are ways around it. There are apps and ways in which we get tested and share that with that our providers can share that with our partners, so on and so forth. So it doesn't have to be quite that complicated, but oftentimes people don't think about, like my aunt, getting the HIV test, right? Which essentially is a prevention effort. It does not preventing you from getting HIV, but it might help prevent you from that HIV progressing to AIDS. Over 10 years, how many people might you have also then given that virus to without knowing it? Again, you were among the people in the situation who didn't get tested, so didn't know you had the thing, right? Even your doctor is like, well, you're a heterosexual, cisgendered, white woman in your 60s. Why would I test you for HIV? Okay, not to be funny, but why wouldn't you? Right? I mean, my provider used to give me a hard time. I don't have that provider anymore. But really, Lori, you want to get tested for HIV again? Yes. Even my current provider said, well, you're a sexually active, monogamous woman, she said to me. I was like, am I? We didn't talk about any of that. I mentioned a spouse. And then she made some assumptions, and I'm not saying they're true or not true, but she didn't ask me any questions, right? So some of those prevention things also can be tricky, because even providers will say, well, you're not at risk for this. Meanwhile, my aunt did have HIV and did have AIDS. And thank goodness it's the year 2023 and that she lives in the United States of America, because she's almost non-detectable now because we have really good medication. She got really good care. Her cytomegalovirus even is slightly reduced. It's a virus in your eye. It can be pretty nasty. In any case, prevention, right? And so trying to think about all of those different ways. So maybe we're not going to prevent something 100%, but maybe we can prevent the most significant consequences of it, right? These are reasons why we learn first aid and CPR. These are reasons why maybe we get the Narcan training. So we have that in case someone's having an opioid overdose. These are the reasons we take mental health first aid, so we can help somebody who might be in a crisis that might lead to suicide ideation or contemplation. We get preventative screenings, so we catch cancer early on. Testicular cancer, age range 18 to 25. If you find a lump, you can generally survive it. Breast cancer survival rate nowadays, 90%. Not all cancers are that survivable. Some of them are definitely fightable, but definitely the earlier we catch something, the more hope there is, the more likelihood there is, sorry, my foot's falling asleep, that we can actually get better, if not be cured from whatever that cancer may be. So we're often afraid. People say, well, I'm nervous to get an HIV test. It's like, well, what's the worst that can happen? You're negative or you're positive and you seek treatment, because the worst that can happen is to have HIV and not know you have it, in my opinion, my professional opinion. And so again, thinking about all of the different elements of prevention. So they can be a little bit scary. They require us to have intention and to reason our actions, which we might not all want to do. It requires us to have self-efficacy, right? And believe in our ability to control our behaviors. We have the power over the donuts, right? We have the ability to make ourselves go to the gym. We can put ourselves to bed on time or early, right? We can put on the sunscreen, even if it's annoying, right? And so help the people that we're working with to try to counter that balance, such that the reasons why they would do the thing or behave in the way that they are ultimately wanting to outweigh the reasons why they're not doing it now, right? Or not behaving in the way they would hope to now. All right. I'm going to stop there. I think I'm at time. I appreciate your attention. I'm sorry that I'm talking to myself all summer and I'm not being critical, just saying. I'm going to end the recording now.